For the Hot Mess Life Coach Season 5, Episode 7. I'm here with my co-host, Morgan Barbrett. Good morning, Mo.
Good morning, Brian.
And today
Happy to be back.
yeah, it's so good to be back. And today we're going to talk about emotional regulation, how to do it, why it's important, what is it even possible? Because definitely it can feel impossible at times depending on what you're going through. But it's a skill, and it's a skill that people can develop. They can hone it. You can practice it. It will have reliable results. Just like if you were to be disciplined about going to the gym, you will reliably get stronger. It's like that with emotional regulation too. It's not mysterious. It's not easy, but it is simple. And if you practice it, it gets stronger.
Yeah. So I feel like sometimes when we think about emotions, a lot of people will see them as either a good or a bad thing, or sometimes there's almost like a stigma against emotions and feeling them in general. So a lot of people learn to repress them, learn to avoid them, and try not to feel them at all. But regulating your emotions is more than just not feeling them, is more than just avoiding them. It's actually kind of a separate process. And the reason that we want to advocate for like true emotional regulation is because when you're avoiding or suppressing them and not actually regulating them per se, they come back in like droves. Like if I feel angry and I resist feeling that and I push it down, then it's going to come back later in a more explosive way. But if I'm able to regulate, if I'm able to like gain the skill of actually experiencing but regulating them at the same time, then they won't come back later in a way that is harder to control.
Yeah, I love that. Experiencing them while regulating them is such a great way to put it. And when as you were talking, it made me think of I think of like emotional regulation. There is a skill. There's emotional regulation skills, and then there's just the
Yes.
fact of emotional regulation, like regulating. And if you do it skillfully, it's effective, and you've regulated your emotions effectively, and it helps you move through the world, and you're processing your emotions when you regulate them skillfully. But you can regulate them unskillfully. Like it's still regulating your emotion when you avoid it, right? You've regulated it and said, I'm putting a regulation, caution tape, no, don't go there. So that's a regulation, but it's not effective at all, because that regulation will only work for a little while. You know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
I'm going to hold the anger at bay, probably while it's quote unquote working and you're not feeling angry. You're also doing a destructive coping mechanism or coping pattern. So that's usually what comes up when you avoid as a way to regulate. The emotion pops up in some other way. It won't feel like anger. It'll feel like cheesecake, but that's what will happen. Right. And like, so that's
Yeah.
and then still further down the line, like you said, the anger itself will still come back. So not only do you not actually avoid it altogether when you use avoidance as your regulation strategy, but you also add these other elements of destructive coping patterns that have to show up because you're regulating it in a way that's like not actually part of your system. You're just doing it
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. So the thing that's coming to mind in terms of like a metaphor of how like true effective emotional regulation works, and I've never used this metaphor before, but it's personal for me, is I have a yard for the first time, and a yard means that you get weeds. and
Okay.
and so sometimes I'll like look in my backyard and I'll be like, I need to weed, I need to pull some weeds. And sometimes I do a little bit. And sometimes I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, like I just don't want to deal with that. And so then I don't go out and weed. And when I don't go out and weed, then they spread.
Oh yeah.
They spread like wildfire. They're terrible. And if I am regulating my emotions effectively, and that means I'm regularly feeling or facing whatever is coming up for me, i.e. weeds, um, actively, like, I guess, grooming my emotional landscape or grooming my lawn.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, then it stays beautiful. Um, Not that I don't really think that weeding is that important, but I do think that emotionally regulating is important. And in terms of whether things, continue to come up or spread, that regularity of returning to taking care of your lawn, taking care of your emotional landscape, that is what prevents things from getting out of control.
Yeah. Wow. I love that analogy. That's amazing. The thing, as you're talking, like I'm thinking of that analogy and I'm like thinking of like the weeds, right? And it's like, so sitting in your garden or in your
Mhm.
yard, right? That's basically sitting in your internal landscape. You're sitting in your internal world. And the weeding is facing and confronting the emotions that you would normally avoid and say, I'm not going to weed
Yeah.
today because weeding is hard and boring and I don't like it.
Yeah.
So instead you go in and you pull out the weeds. That's the way of like experiencing the emotions. This
Mhm.
is for me where the analogy then I want to make such a clear distinction. Weeds, if you're a gardener, you just pull them and throw them away. So in this
Mhm.
case, the analogy here is will change, right? In the emotional world, you will pick the weed and you won't throw it away. You will get to know it really, really, really well. That's the difference.
Is that composting? I just got a
Oh,
composter.
sure. Yes. Like if we figure out how do we put it into this, yeah. So if it's composting, for sure, that's a beautiful analogy because what that explains then is that you've taken the weed from a place where it's not functioning well, and
Yeah.
you don't cast it out. You instead put it in a different part of your internal landscape where it can actually nurture,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
because
that's
then I get to
key
throw it
because
back into my garden, and it is going to help grow the things that I actually want to cultivate in my space.
true, just like it is with real emotions, like you regulate your anger, right? And then you can't cast anger out and say, "I'm never going to be a person that feels anger," because as we know, we've talked about in other episodes, that leads to piles of health problems, right? So instead,
Mhm.
you you do the weeding, right? You say, "Oh, I'm going to experience this anger right now because of this slight that I just had," right? So now you're experiencing it instead of avoiding it. That's your weeding it. But you're not saying never anger again. You're saying, "Thank you. I understand why you're here. A boundary was crossed. I'm going to work through all that." And then anger
Mhm.
gets to live in your body, not in your garden, in your compost pile because it's
Yeah.
helpful. It's an adaptive response. Like all of the emotions are, even the ones that we really really hate, shame, guilt,
Yeah.
regret, they have a benevolent purpose. They all
Yeah.
do. And so yeah, weed them out, but then compost them right there in the other area of your heart where they
Yeah.
really belong.
Mhm. Ooh, I like that it worked once we extended it.
Ooh, that was awesome. Yeah. So and it's funny you said like I don't think weeding is that important, and I'm with you. And so the level of importance that this has. Think of the analogy this way: how important gardeners think weeding is
Mhm.
of paramount
Yeah.
importance to a gardener. That's how important emotional regulation is to all humans because we
Yeah,
all have
well
this garden.
it's important so I think that weeding is going to become more important for me because I'm getting into gardening. I have a garden for the first time,
Oh, cool.
this year because I just got, my house, my yard. And before that, I didn't have like any yard, right? So it is becoming more important. But the reason it's important is because you need to do it if you want to cultivate a specific, growth. So if it's in the same sense, if I want to cultivate certain emotions, if I want to feel good, happy, joyful, grateful, calm, peaceful, whatever, if I want to feel those emotions, it requires that I face all the other ones.
Yes. Yeah. There's no getting around that, right? Like
Yeah.
if you blot out one, you're dampening down your ability to experience the full range, even the
Mhm.
ones you love, like joy,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I guess I'll have to start caring about weeding if I wanna have a nice garden.
Yes, you will. So in that case, weeding is very important. So as a gardener now it's important. And as a human,
Mhm.
weeding our emotional gardens is important. And
Yeah.
it's not even just that it leads to if you face all those negative ones, you'll feel the positive ones more. That's absolutely true. But there's so many other benefits to really being able to embrace and practice and become skillful at emotional regulation instead of just doing it unskillfully, which is what we mostly do.
Mhm.
Unskillfully looks like my addiction to Starbucks. That's an unskillful way of regulating my anxiety in the morning, right? Like it's
Uh-huh.
unskillful and because it leads to other things. And so not only does learning the skill help you feel the positive emotions more, but it helps in so many other areas. Like it'll help you to stay focused and with good judgment in the face of a crisis. It'll help you protect important relationships and connections in your life because you won't be blowing up at people and having knee jerk responses to things that aren't about you. it'll help you not take things personally when other people are behaving badly around you. And instead of being triggered, you'll be able to be curious or compassionate or just walk away, depending on
Yeah.
what the situation calls for. So it also makes you able to actively listen better, like your focus, your concentration, all of that, all of those things
Mhm.
start to come online in a brand new way when you begin to be intentional and skillful about regulating your emotions instead of just doing
Yeah.
it by shoving them out of sight.
Yeah. So, what are like the basics of emotional regulation? I also want to hear later, how do you emotionally regulate? What are the things that you turn to? But what if we were to boil it down in like its simplest form? What do you think emotional regulation looks like?
Yeah, okay. Wow. Emotional regulation. For me, what it looks like now is immediate noticing. So it's like really being in tune with not how I feel emotionally necessarily, although that's part of it, but like being really in tune with like how my body is reacting to things, like what are my sensations that are happening. Like when somebody walks into a room and you're like, ooh, that changed the vibe. Like there's a weird vibe in here now, that kind
Mhm.
of thing. Like you're not feeling angry, right? You're not even feeling
Yeah.
scared. Like there's no emotion attached to that. It's a vibe though. And so that's a nuanced thing to understand, is that sort of sensations and vibes, you can feel them and they are
Yeah.
feelings, but they are not emotional in nature. They're a sense. They're sensational. We have the ability
Yeah.
to sense things and we have the ability to feel things, and they're different. And so the reason I'm making that distinction is because for me, part of emotionally regulating is like, I don't have to tune into what I'm feeling. I know I feel mad, I feel sad, I feel scared. So that's right there in my face. And so what I do to emotionally regulate is I drop from how I'm feeling into what is happening what am I sensing? And in
Yeah.
that sensing comes new information. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
okay, so I'm scared, but my body's telling me this is an exciting thing to go toward, or I'm scared and my body is telling me run, you're going to die, right? So it's like
Mhm.
that's one way, is like dropping into my sensational landscape helps me have clarity over what is the emotion trying to say, because the emotion's a
Yeah.
messenger but the body's the interpreter, and without the interpreter we don't really understand the message, and so we'll think the message is whatever the most common message would normally be. The most common message from fear is run, but that's not always what fear is saying, and you need the body to translate it for you.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I guess like I was thinking that emotional regulation is like you said, feeling the sensations in your body, and then a whole other level in some cases is naming them. Like, oh, this is fear, recognizing
For
like what the
sure.
sensations could be connected to. But you make a good point in that sometimes we'll feel sensations in our body that like don't immediately connect to like an emotion word,
Right.
or we don't know exactly what emotion it is, but that experience of the sensations is enough to give you information about what's going on. And in order to emotionally regulate, it requires us to pause
Yeah.
long enough to feel that. Because most of the time, like when we're on autopilot, when we're just like living our lives and we're not working on emotional regulation, those sensations are happening in our body, but we may never even like pay attention to them
Yep.
or pause to notice them or name them. Um, and in many ways, we just kind of skip over it.
Yeah.
And therefore, we don't know what to do with it. We don't know that there is information to be benefited from there.
Yeah, it's so true. This is like such a here's the thing, like we all do know, we just don't realize we know, because we all use this language around one specific thing, which we say, oh, I should have trusted my gut. I had a gut feeling. Oh, I didn't listen
Mhm.
to my gut, or I trusted my gut and XYZ miracle happened, right? Like it's like we hear that over and over and over again. That is an indication of a person either tuning into and listening to, or tuning into and overriding their
Mhm.
sensational landscape, because their logical landscape or emotional landscape was telling them something else, and they were
Mhm.
relying on those two landscapes, which are literally just the information, and not relying on the body, which is the translator. The body is the one that has the most wisdom. The thinking mind, it's just there, and we have to bring everything it says through the wisdom of the body in order to know what to do next.
Yeah. I feel like people forget how sophisticated the human body is.
Yeah, I often
Literally. literally like hundreds of thousands of years of like refinement of like evolution and change in a physical living body has, given us all these tools to be able to react to the world in a way that helps us survive, react to the world in a way that helps us be connected to other people and be in community. And half of humans now are just like, oh, like, my brain and the words that I'm thinking in my head are more sophisticated than that. And it's like, obviously we want to think things through, and it's a tool that we can use to like help us move in a right direction. Like I'm not against like rationality or logic or anything, but I'm just saying like your body knows things and can process things faster sometimes than your brain can.
Yeah.
That's what fight or flight is. That's what like the guttural reactions of your body are operating on information that your brain cannot consciously process, at
Yeah.
least not quickly.
And in some cases never, because there's these studies that came out, I think it was like 2016, and they were talking about the way that the body and brain process information, and the mind processes like 40 bits of information per second. It's a lot, right? 40.
Mm-hmm.
But the brain, but the body, it's 11 million. So it's like
Yeah.
11 million bits of information per second versus 40, right? Like, which one do you want to rely on? And it's like, we're just taught by culture to rely on the mind, like, because that's all
Yeah.
culture knows. The mind is the newest tool, and it's right here and it's made of words. So we mistake it for our identity all the time. And then which is normal, but it's not true. And so we just don't even think of tuning into the body, or we do tune into it and then we override it because
Yeah.
we're not used to thinking of it as actually wise. In fact, we think of it as like sometimes in the way. Oh, I wish the butterflies in my stomach would just calm down so I could walk down this dark alley. No, the butterflies are telling you not to walk down the dark alley. You know what I mean? Come on.
Yeah.
But we don't know that. We don't think of the butterflies as being that intelligent. We think of them as being something in the way of what I want to do. And so we
Yeah.
override them. When in fact, they were trying to save your life.
Yeah. No, this makes me think of somebody that I worked with once where like, and I won't give any identifying information, but they they had like previously been a very self-motivated person, and they were a go-getter and like hyper independent and pretty much could do anything that they set their mind to. And then they started coaching when they were at a job that basically everything about that job felt like it was against their values. They didn't get along with the people that were there. They felt like they were doing things at that job that didn't feel right to them. And so they came to coaching and they were like, why do I feel so drained? Why can't I do any of the things that I used to be able to do? I want to feel motivated. And it was like difficult to find a way to express to this person that like if the thing that you're primarily spending your time on feels all kinds of wrong in your body and you hate it, but you're like making yourself do it anyways, like that is that is going to affect your energy levels and your ability to exist. It's going to affect your motivation. It's going to affect your mood.
And it would affect your ability to emotionally regulate, because emotional
Yeah.
regulation takes energy. It really does. Like, it's not an easy process. It's simple. The steps are simple, but it's very, very difficult and complex
Yeah.
inside as you do it. And so in order to emotionally regulate, you really want your energy to be as free as possible. That's why all of these things go hand in hand, like finding your right life, following your passion, going towards your excitement as much as you can.
Mhm.
Whether if it's not for your career, if that's not your reality, can you find space for the things you love in other areas of your life? Because that
Yeah.
that thing, living that life that's of an alignment and joy, it helps to emotionally regulate. And it's a circle. On the flip side, practicing emotional regulation, if your life is totally wrong, will help you be able to then make the steps towards your right life. So both are possible. It's wherever your starting point is, give yourself grace and just begin. It's okay.
Mhm.
We've all had to begin somewhere. Like when you asked me earlier what emotional regulation was like for me, and I was saying it's about the sensations, you made the
Mhm.
counterpoint, like sometimes it is about naming the emotions. And I loved that you said that, because like the truth is 10 years ago, emotional regulation looked different for me than it does now.
Yeah.
Now I don't have to think about, I'm going to pause and I'm going to go to my sensations. That's what I do. And so that was the answer I gave you. But
Yeah.
as you answered back, it made me realize, like, I want to be clear with everyone, like, absorbing this content, that's me 10 to 12 years into my journey of figuring out how to emotionally regulate. The
Yeah.
beginning of my journey was actually really, really hard because it was very much just like, oh, I'm feeling anger now. Oh, I'm feeling worthlessness now. Oh, I'm feeling guilt now. And
Mhm.
I didn't have the thing inside to say feeling those things is okay, or feeling those things is normal, or feeling those things doesn't mean I'm broken, because I was still
That's a part of emotional regulation is saying all of those things.
yeah, so I was connected to all of those words
Mhm.
still, all of those thoughts and beliefs. And so I was then brought self-awareness into the picture, because that's the first step of your spiritual awakening. When you bring self-awareness into the picture and you're still really dysfunctional and struggling, and your
Mhm.
emotions are everywhere, self-awareness does not feel friendly at that point.
No.
It feels awful. It feels really awful, but it is still your friend. And so I wanted to just make that super clear, that it is can be just as simple as, like, I feel this right now. That
Yeah.
is the beginning of emotionally regulating. And if that's all you can do, and you may find that makes you feel worse for a moment,
Yeah.
but sitting with it, with the truth of it, the grace and relief of just telling yourself the truth will come so
Yeah.
quickly on the heels of that. And then you will start to see what it means. Like, that this lie that we've all been told, that I can avoid my suffering by avoiding what I feel. That is such a lie. And the more that we go towards what we feel, even if it makes us suffer, we actually exit long term suffering
Yeah.
completely when we do it this way. But it feels so counterintuitive and it's really scary. And
Yeah.
so if you can't get to the sensations in your body yet, just know that I could not do that for 11 years either. Okay. And that's okay.
Yeah. Well, and if you are allowing yourself to experience emotions and then you start to feel worse, just try to like look and see if your brain is telling you that like I shouldn't be feeling this, or it's not okay for me to feel this way, or I'm wrong or bad because I feel blah blah blah. All of those things, like it's not feeling the emotions that makes you feel bad, it's the thoughts about the emotions that you're feeling that makes it feel worse.
Yeah. Oh, such a good, that's so good. Like, because sadness does feel yucky. You feel
Yeah,
sad, right? So there's no getting around that. Like, sadness feels like sadness. But
right.
when you add to that sadness, I should be over this already. Oh, you're being silly. Look at everybody
Yeah,
else who's past it now. Or I'm alone in my feelings. Any of those words that add,
yeah.
those are fuel. They're kindling to this fire.
Mhm.
And they make sadness feel worse than sadness actually feels.
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
we go through the rest of our life thinking, "Ooh, sadness feels like that." When actually,
Yeah.
straight up sadness doesn't feel like that. It still doesn't
Yeah.
feel great, but it doesn't feel like that, you know?
Yeah. It's and I'm gonna pull another random emotion about or not emotion, metaphor about vegetables and gardens.
Great.
Like, if you're, like, making a soup, like, if I just, like, toss a whole carrot in the pot, that's not like, it just is a carrot. That's, like, one emotion, but then when I have all my thoughts about it, then I'm putting all the other ingredients in there, and then it's a whole different experience, so just notice if what you're experiencing is a singular emotion or if it's a whole amalgamation of 10 different emotions and all your thoughts about them that are triggering more emotions that
Mhm.
had then created emotion soup. Because
Yeah.
it's one carrot in a pot is not going to overwhelm you.
Yeah. It's not even
It will
soup.
not. It's not soup. It's just a carrot.
Burn.
But not that soup is overwhelming. It's overwhelmingly tasty. I love soup. But yeah, all I'm getting at is that it's like an emotion in itself without your thoughts on top of it, without the meaning that we make of it, will not create a panic attack. It will not completely overwhelm you. It's going but most people don't experience emotions in isolation. So it's just kind of important to watch and observe what else is occurring in my emotional experience, what else is occurring in my brain when this emotion happens. Because Brian and I were also talking about how some emotions for different people are more difficult or less difficult to regulate. So
Mhm.
for Brian, he has a harder time with sadness, and for me, I have a hard time with anger. And the
Yeah.
reason for that is not because either of these emotions are like factually more difficult to like feel. It's because we have different thoughts about these different emotions and that creates the difficulty of regulating or handling those emotions.
Exactly. So an example for me of like, it's not that I'm scared of feeling sad, but like when sadness comes on, if at a certain point it starts to feel more threatening than say really a lot of anger. Because when I feel a lot of anger, I know what to do. I feel this like I can regulate, I can push it aside. Like I don't mean push it aside as in avoid it. I mean like I can have it ease back and I can be responsive in the moment and then I can go attend to it after. Like I feel that
Mhm.
skill with anger is part of me now, right?
Right.
Because of practice, because I had a lot of anger in my 20s. And with sadness, like there really hasn't been a lot of important death in my life. Like there isn't a lot of
Mm.
practice for me around like grieving
Yeah.
sadness. Like I've been sad in my life, but like that kind of like deep grieving from loss, like it feels very threatening to me because I've
Mm.
only dealt with it a little, right? And so when I have that sadness, my thoughts around it are this could annihilate me. That thought makes the sadness worse. Similar to your thing of like, I'm not supposed to feel anger because it's not cool in this culture, makes the anger
Mhm.
that you're feeling worse, right? Like those are
Mhm.
our thoughts. Like the thoughts that we're adding, they are the kindling that make the whole thing kind
Yeah.
of explode. And then when it explodes, we feel like it's harder to regulate because that's then what we need to try to do in that moment is like, I have to regulate my emotions, but I have to regulate my thinking. Fuck.
Yeah, regulating your thinking is hard enough. But but I don't say that to say that this is, you know, difficult or, like, impossible. We just kinda have to simplify it for us to work on it. Like, I'm not saying, like, regulating your thinking and regulating your emotions are, like, just really hard, and so, like, you're not gonna be able to figure it out, don't try. It's really just a practice,
Mhm.
as with anything else, and as Brian has expressed, when you work on it for a while, then you get to a point where you can feel those emotions without them overwhelming you. You can feel those emotions without reacting to them in a way that you'll regret. You can feel them and feel calm about the fact that you're feeling them, which almost sounds counterintuitive because a lot of times when people feel emotions, it causes genuine panic.
Yeah.
When you have learned how to emotionally regulate, you can experience any emotion without panic.
Yeah. In fact, that's the way the system was designed. In my
Mhm.
opinion, the natural human emotional system is meant to allow you to feel it fully without going into panic, like an overwhelm. That's
Mhm.
the idea, but our culture has made it
Well,
so.
except fight or flight. Fight or flight is kind of inherently a
Yeah. Oh,
little
it is fight or
panicked,
flight. That. Yeah. Sure.
but the other ones,
I want to say about this, like it can feel daunting, this whole thing, right? And
yeah.
emotion, emotional regulation and thought regulation. Now that we're in that realm too,
Mhm.
they are the result of practicing self awareness. So self awareness, which sucks at the beginning, is the way in to practicing these. So what I mean by that is like you're feeling really emotional. Now you're noticing the thoughts because you've listened to this podcast. You're like, I have all this stuff to do, right? And how do I do it? I've never regulated. It's okay if you're noticing those things now. Oh, I'm feeling grief and fear, and I'm having these 7 thoughts about it, right? That's self-awareness. That is already successful. So like that's what I want to like leave people with. Like it can feel really overwhelming to, but if you're going to embark on this journey of emotional regulation and what you notice is, wow, these emotions are really hard to deal with and there's these limiting beliefs, that's enough. And what you can say right then is, I'm noticing more for the first time. Good for me.
Mhm.
That's enough.
Yeah.
Because the thing is on this journey, like when you notice emotions that about yourself that you don't like or thoughts about yourself that you deem to be dumb or irrational, the thing that we a knee jerk thing is to go be critical about ourselves and about this process. Oh, I'm so not good at this. Blah, blah, blah. That's going to really make it a lot longer and harder as you practice. But if you just go into it knowing you suck at it, you know what I mean? Knowing you're bad at it because you've never done it before, then that's fine. Then you go in and you say, okay, I'm feeling regret and I'm having this awful thought about regret that makes it worse. Hey, I noticed. Good for me. That's enough.
Yeah.
You're not going to feel way better that day, but you made a lot of progress because most
Yeah.
people just go through their entire life believing that their thoughts are exactly who they are. And when you can put that
Mm.
little bit of space between it, you're opening a whole world of self control.
Yeah. Hmm. The one thing we didn't touch on, which we don't really have a ton of time for, but I don't want to leave people without saying, is that emotional regulation is not just feeling your emotions and like noticing your thoughts. There's also a physical component.
Hmm.
So if your physical needs are not met, for example, you didn't get enough sleep, that is going to be emotionally dysregulating. If you have not gotten proper nutrition, that's going to be emotionally dysregulating. And so sometimes when you feel dysregulated or you're feeling a lot of emotions and you're not sure why and you're confused about it, ask yourself, what physical needs do I have that I could better fill? Like what adjustments that can I make to make sure that I'm nourished and rested and cared for? Or, in some cases, just like having connection and hugs with, people that you care about or that you feel safe with helps with regulating. So there's that piece, and there's also the piece of improving the flow of energy in your body through movement is a huge aspect of emotional regulation. So there's all sorts of research that shows that like yoga, which are like it's basically a flow practice, like an energetic flow practice more than like a workout. That in a lot of cases it has better emotional mental health outcomes than like strenuous exercise because it's improving the flow of energy in your body and releasing pent up emotions.
Hmm.
That's a lot of people cry when they do yoga, and it's because it's opening up the flow of energy in your body. And I don't really do yoga. I mostly just like weight lift and do like workouts, but also when I do workouts, I'll like pat like areas of my body to like improve like the flow of my lymphatic system.
Yeah.
Um, and that for me really helps regulate my emotions. So it doesn't have to just be like doing things in your head or feeling your emotions. It can also be, how do I like stretching? How do I improve the flow of energy in my body by opening up the flow of anything in my body, lymphatic system, your blood. Some people do skin brushing. All of these things also
Yeah.
connect back to your emotions.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought this up because we've been talking a lot this morning about emotional regulation, what it is, why we need it, why it's important, a little bit how to do it, but not much. Makes me think that if you're game for this, we could do another half an hour where it's really just about how to emotionally
Yeah.
regulate, and we could teach a whole bunch of different skills and
Yeah.
tactics and things because there's like nature, there's music, there's so many ways to go about this
Yeah.
that can make it easier. So now that we've left you with this daunting thing, oh, control your thoughts, control your emotions,
Yeah.
good luck. We'll
Yeah.
bring
Let's
you
do
guys.
that next week.
Okay, so next week we're gonna come in with like all these ways that have worked for us to go
Yeah.
about regulating your emotions. So we're not gonna teach you something we haven't tried. Okay.
Yay. Awesome. I'm looking forward to that.
Me too. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here or listening to it from the future. We appreciate you so much. And we will see you next Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And we're going to get into the nitty gritty of how exactly we can successfully regulate our emotions. Until then, be hot, be messy, and be blessed. Much love, everybody. Bye.
Bye.